Commissioner of Charities, Dr. Ang Hak Seng, distinguished speakers and guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this morning's session. A very warm welcome, and it's quite warm here. Well, I'm very happy to see such a good crowd. It shows that whichever charity you belong to, you are taking your work very seriously, and you have this zeal to learn and develop your governance capabilities. Today, we are speaking on a reasonably new but not unknown topic of risk management. The Charity Council is truly honored to have worked closely with KPMG Singapore and National University of Singapore Business Schools on this initiative. Both partners have worked very hard in conducting a sector-wide survey, analyzing the results, and in the development of the two publications which you have received today. I think it's a starting point, and it's good to take stock of where we are and then address our shortfall. And it's a journey. It's not something that you're going to achieve within a year, but if you keep on improving, you're going to get there. Risk management is indeed a very important governance practice and is key to good stewardship. The ability to identify, understand, and manage the risks faced by the charity serves to protect the interests of the beneficiaries, employees, and volunteers, especially in today's volatile environment. Amid the future unknowns, charities need to have the capacity to plan ahead and anticipate the future. I think when we speak about risks, you're all familiar about financial risks because you know if you run out of money, that's the end of it. But risk entails much, much more than that: operational risk, reputational risk. So this morning's session will open up your minds to the whole plethora of risks that you should be giving attention to. It will really help the organization to ensure sustainability and continuous operation of the charity in times of disruptions. You know, things have been going pretty well for most of the charities because of goodwill and so forth, but think of it seriously. If you're running a childcare facility and you don't have a robust system to vet the people you hire, and accidentally you hire one with a past record of child abuse, and it happens in your charity, think of the consequence. And today with social communication, that's it. It's going to be all over Singapore, and it's going to be very difficult for your charity to survive. So it is important to note that good risk management is not only about the risk function. Having got the booklet, please don't rush out and do a checklist and get everyone ticking the boxes, thinking they have dealt with the subject. It is really about drawing the right values and positive risk management culture throughout the organizations. It begins with the right tone at the top, the board. The board must take it seriously, the CEO, key management personnel, and have it filtering all the way down. Once you have it and your staff knows you're serious about it and knows what the culture and the value is, then when they encounter something unusual, chances are they will deal with it in the right way within the stated culture and within the values of the organization itself. Risk management is not just a process carried out by a few or by the management only. All employees across organizations need to understand what risk is about and become risk managers in the business. That means ownership. If people go around and saying it's not my problem, it's somebody else's problems, you could have a problem. So it's ownership. With core knowledge of their role, they become risk managers and help to put in place processes or methods that can help the organization run itself better and do the right thing. So bear in mind the whole cahoots of it, especially reputational risks. You work very hard over the years to build up the reputation of your organization, and you don't want one of these things to happen just because you have neglected it. And reputational risk is one of the most disastrous things that you can face because of the internet. And even if you explain yourself and try to rectify it, whatever is posted on the internet remains there forever. And people years later encounter it. Sometimes they think it's something current, actually it's something that happened 15, 20 years ago. So it's always a challenge, so do look out for reputational risk. Implementing risk management, as I say, is a journey, and I hope that today you will pick up lessons from two of our distinguished speakers, and just bear in mind, don't get overly stressed out as to how you're going to implement it, but reflect on it and work on it. It's a journey, and I know for some of you, you have begun on this journey, but rest assured, the Charity Council will always be there to advise, enable, and to guide you in this journey. We will have a plethora of enablers spread out over the next few years, such as the recently extended VWO Charities Capability Fund, the VCF. I think all of you love it. But we have enabled it, extended it, and this will help you to send people for training and to get consultancy services to implement your risk management. There will still be the annual Charity Governance Conference, as well as town halls and seminars to uplift the sector on governance best practices. So take it positively. When you have an assessment, take it as a learning lesson. Know where the weaknesses are so that you can address them. Don't take it negatively. Even when we do the transparency index and all this, basically it's just tell you, hey, you know, there's some of these areas that you can work on to strengthen. And if you take it from that perspective, step by step, year by year, you will improve. So it's our hope that as we journey together, charities will also form ground-up communities to share good practices and even templates to SOPs. Especially for you who are in similar services, you should get together, compare notes, and learn from each other. Don't reinvent the wheel. It saves a lot of energy. So all those who are in childcare, get together and say, oh, what are you doing in terms of managing your risk? And learn from each other. Those of you who are together running healthcare services, get together, form a group and discuss, and you'll save so much energy and time. So I wish all of you a very pleasant morning of learning. I look forward to your active participation in today's discussion. We have very prominent people on the panel, so shoot them the questions. They're here to answer them. And it's really the best time for you to seek clarifications and pick on the expertise of our distinguished guests. Thank you very much.
Today, we are honored to have Mr. Irvin Low, Head of Risk Consulting, KPMG in Singapore, for a sharing session on the landscape of risk management practice among charities in Singapore. So without further ado, let us invite him on stage to deliver his presentation, please. Mr. Low, please.
I'm going to take you all through and just really share with you, what we're here for this morning, to talk a bit about, how we look at the risk management sort of framework and function. But before I do, I'd like to thank the Chairman of the Charity Council, Mr. Gerard E. Commissioner, Dr. Ang Hak Seng, and the NUS Prof. Ho, who really helped in this whole project itself. And I'll give you a bit of background as to why we started this journey, because I think it's obviously quite important in terms of what we're trying to achieve here. So just as an introduction, as you can see, the code, and I have to say that I do a lot of work in the private sector as well, dealing with a lot of listed companies. If you look at the charities code, you're actually ahead, because for the private sector, we're only reviewing our code now for the third time, which will probably take place next year or the year after. So this is the genesis of where we started in November 2007. We had an amendment in August 2015, and the latest release of the code, which is in April, just recently in 2017, effective 1st of January 2018. The new bits that's being added is in Principle 6.1.4, which essentially states that the board should ensure that there is a process to identify, regularly monitor, and review the charity's key risks. Obviously, this should also cover what you call mitigating measures and controls for all these key risks. So if you read that requirement itself, it sounds fairly simple, but I know where we all struggle. When we sort of go back to our organization, we sit down and we ask ourselves, how do we actually implement and execute what's required in this particular code itself? And that's what really I wanted to talk to you about this morning. How do we look at this actual requirement and ask ourselves, what do we actually do when you go back to your organization this morning? Before we start, I just wanted to share with you why we started on this journey. It's really to assess the current state, as Chairman noted, in terms of where the charity sector is with respect to the adoption of enterprise risk management. Sounds like a fairly large sort of scope when you talk about enterprise risk management, because what we are really referring to here is the entire enterprise, which means everything under the umbrella of what happens within the organization. We've been doing work in this sector for quite a while now, principally after the NKF days. We started on this journey helping some of the corporates, and we realized that the biggest thing that the charity sector lacked was resources. And because they lacked resources, in a lot of ways, they found it hard to focus, which means that they did everything and anything they thought was important at that point in time. So today, something could be important, but tomorrow, something else could take precedence. So it became an issue of how do we prioritize our efforts as a result of lack of resources. I realized my biggest risk is tripping on one of these wires as well. So I should stand still and not move, hopefully. So it comes down to a point of, when we started looking across the board, started working for some of the sector administrators, we realized that something was really missing. Right? People did this because they wanted to do this, and all of you here, I'm sure, are in this sector because you have an absolute passion in terms of who and what you're doing in your organization that you work with or you serve on. I see a lot of colleagues here, or ex-colleagues, some of the big four partners. These are exactly the people we need in these organizations because they will help you to navigate your way through some of these difficult tasks. So we wanted to do this, and again, not that we're lobbying that this is included in the code, but from a practitioner's point of view, we wanted to help you to recognize that because resources are limited, how do you prioritize? So this is where we wanted to take stock with respect to asking ourselves where we are in this particular journey itself. The second bit of this, when we sort of sat with Prof. Ho and we sort of came up with the idea to say, well, maybe what was lacking through our own personal experiences in this particular sector was the fact that people said that this was too big, this was too hard. So it came down to a point that whether we could develop something simple, and that's why we came up with this little booklet. Right? Some may think this booklet is not small, but it is the smallest booklet that I've done in enterprise risk management. Right? So just to put things in perspective. I told my team, together with Prof. Ho's team, so I had to thank Susan as well as Richard, you see in the back of this as well, who really helped us to sort of craft and construct something which we wanted to be actually quite simple in actual fact. So simple to the point that if you could turn to every page of this, you could really understand this. And I say this, with a heavy heart because, when we do work for the private sector, in some of big listed companies, even they struggle. So I have absolute sympathy for you in respect of why this is difficult for you, because even in the private sector, where we work with big companies, small-sized companies, they struggle at the same time as well. So don't think you're here, don't think you are in this alone, because even for some of the listed companies, they will also cite that they do not have enough resources or the expertise to do this. But what I hope that you will walk out this morning is to know that this is not difficult. As Chairman said, that you're not alone, you will get help, but the main thing is that this is actually not difficult. It's as difficult as you think it is as easy as you want it to be. And that's all I will put it at this point in time. So if you look at the actual scope of the organizations in terms of what we tried to poll, there were about 222, but that was from a number of 2217, of which 139 of these are IPCs. So Prof will tell you, as an academic, that statistically, it gives us a pretty good representation in terms of, if we were to extrapolate the data from this sort of population, it gives us a very good feel in terms of what the whole sector actually looks like in terms of the adoption of risk management. So this is the breakdown. I'm going to stand aside here because I'm really risking myself of falling off. As you can see, in terms of the different sectors in your charities part, social welfare, about 27%, religious, 26%, sports, 10%, health, 9.5%, education, all the way down to arts and heritage at 5%. So I think a fairly good spread in actual fact with respect to the 222 in terms of what we were trying to gather. So let me share with you then the key observations and the survey results that some of you here have participated to respond back in terms of what you were seeing in your own particular organization. If I could summarize, there were 4 key themes. Number 1, risk management adoption is really is what I call the emergent state, which means that it is only starting in terms of what we're hoping to achieve and hoping to do here. Number 2, very clearly, without a doubt, there's a lack of understanding of risk management benefits. And I think in a lot of ways, if I may say so, the fear creeps in because, in everyone's mind, this appears to be a really large animal when in fact it is not. So if you think of a situation, if you're small, obviously your work is smaller. If you're big, it just means that your work becomes a lot larger, a lot bigger. So my point here is that risk itself, if you think about your own personal risk management, this is basically what it is, right? If you have a big portfolio of investments, you have larger risk appetite. If you have a smaller risk portfolio of investments, it means that your risk appetite is a lot smaller. So point is, it is scalable according to your size, right? It is not one size fits all, and it's not big if you're not big. It is only big if your organization is big. The third bit is that we needed, I think, greater clarity in terms of risk management responsibility. So before I head on, I wanted to share also number 3, which is quite important. This is where we talk about the structure. The question that one begs to ask is that, who is responsible for risk in your organization? And we've actually asked that question in the survey itself, which I'll share with you shortly. This is important because this is where I think some of us, a lot of us, or a majority of us thinks that risk belongs to either the CEO or belongs to the board, right? I can share with you now that this is in some ways no different when we took a poll with listed companies when we asked them the same questions. The results are quite similar to what I see today in the charity sector. We recently did a study with the Singapore Stock Exchange where we took the same poll, and we can see the education of risk management as we're starting today have changed significantly over the last 5 years. So I was telling Prof, I hope to do this in 2 years' time, and I truly hope to see a different result in terms of what the group here, or those who are not here, will poll differently, right? I've been told that we've reached maximum capacity, which is a good thing, because I'm hoping the people who are not here, who should be here, will get news of this. And maybe the people are here, as I always said, you don't need to be here, because you want to find out what it is. So the other lesson we learned is that the tone from the top is actually quite important. The last bit is really about how we build the awareness. And this is one of the sessions, I suppose, where it's important. We're all here to learn, frankly, including myself. Because every time I speak to each of you, I find different things, I find new things, right? So the learning, in my view, doesn't stop in these sessions, but it starts with what Chairman talked about, the sharing, right? We had a pre-panel discussion, and it's quite amazing because even in that particular session with the Commissioner, I learned new things as well. We learned that not every one of you are the same. You're all different, and you have your own uniqueness in terms of how you look at risk and how you manage risk. Which is my earlier point I made that, even with a toolkit, it doesn't solve all your problems, but it's a start to helping you to solve some of your problems. We asked the question in terms of to what extent risk management is evident in your organization. So we polled it, and you can see the blue bits here, the respondents who said, yes, we have formal documentation with respect to a risk management framework. So this question was directly asked, is that if you had a risk management framework. We had some who answered yes, but without formal documentation, and there were some who answered no, and the smaller proportion have mentioned that they were not sure. So obviously when we wrote this question, we had a hypothesis. The hypothesis was the larger you are, probably meant you had better resources, you had better guidance with respect to risk management. And this proved true, because what the survey results came back, it basically said that those with an gross annual receipts of 10 million or more, as you can see in the blue bar, were the respondents which had responded positively to say that they had risk management framework with formal documentation. So about 25% of you who are in that particular category to say that you had something which is a lot more formal. And if you go down to gross annual receipts from $500,000 to less than 5 million, you can see a big portion to say that, yeah, we do have some sort of risk management, but we don't formally document that process in place. So obviously, you take a step back when something goes wrong, you ask your question when you don't have any formal documentation, guess what happens? Right? This is where, frankly, we lack the we lack the clarity on who's responsible. So that was my earlier conclusion, observation, and summary with respect that if we don't do this in a formal manner, when something goes wrong, we all look at each other and say, who said what, or who did what, or who did not do what they were supposed to do. The ones you should know are the ones I hope to convert today, at least to say that, look, this is better now than never, right? It's a great time to start the process, to start thinking about what you need to do with respect to if you were in that particular category, or even orange and those who are on my right-hand side of this particular chart itself. We asked the question if organizations actually had a formal budget that they allocated with respect to managing risk, with respect to having a framework. So this may mean that you either had a framework, you employed the VCF funding to employ consultants, or you had a particular resource that were dedicated to risk management, which is what you would answer here. And 87.4% of the respondents said that they do not allocate budget to manage risk, which is a fairly high percentage. And I think if I look at all the data points, so one of the things that you have all cited to say that we have lack of resources, right? So I was trying to look at this where it's probably right, because about 25% said that you do it formally, which I'm guessing that this is where the difference is on the 100%, where 85 or 87% of you said we don't have a risk budget, whereas the 25% earlier who said that they had a formal risk management probably did allocate the budget to do something with respect to the risk management function. But then 78.8% of the respondents said they do not formally or regularly do a risk assessment process itself. So if I go back to my previous slide, so this is where there's probably a lot of, not probably a lot, but there's a gap with respect to that particular statistics as well. So while we do it formally, I'm not sure whether respondents said that they started, but the question always is how do you actually maintain it? So one of the other challenges that I've come across is that it is easy to start, but it is actually hard to maintain it, right? So one of the acid tests that I usually do when we do work in this particular sector, we will go in and look at what we helped the organization do in year 1. Year 3, we come back, we ask them, have your risk universe changed? The answer is no. Have anything changed? The answer is no. But the world, as we know, is not static, right? So the acid test is the fact that things should change, things have changed, and so will your risk profile, right? Just like all of us here, as we grow older, unfortunately not younger, our risk appetite will change as well. And in that respect, that's one way of looking at what you have on the table and asking yourself the simple question, well, if I know things have changed, how have not that been reflected on what I'm looking on paper? And that's essentially what we're here to make sure we help focus on the right areas. So we want to ask a question on the cultural bit of risk management, and this is the bit on the understanding of risk management benefits. So here, almost 60% of the respondents said that they do not understand how they can benefit from management of risk, or they're not sure whether they will even benefit from a risk management framework, right? Some of the key issues and challenges that they cited is that their lack of expertise in risk management, lack of human resource, and lack of financial resource. I think they're interrelated to some extent in terms of some of the key issues and challenges. Now, there's a difference between I don't have people and I have people who cannot do this, right? So I just wanted to make that distinction that almost, right, a big proportion have said that I don't have resources, but those who have cited that they don't have people who understand risk management well enough. So I wanted to throw this challenge back to all of you here, which is no different to, as an individual, you manage your risk on a daily basis. And this is where I'll take you through in the second part of this presentation, how you look at that from an individual perspective as well as from an organizational perspective. Frankly, there's no difference, right? Because if you ask yourself as you're crossing the road each day, you're essentially managing your own risk. What do? Right? I teach my kids look left and look right. That's what you do. That's actually risk management in its simplest form, right? When you're in a particular role that you're in your organization, you ask yourself, what is the biggest risk that my job poses to the organization if I don't do it right or if I don't get it right, right? So in actual fact, all of you are risk managers in your own scope of work that you may not realize, because in your job description, it does not say that your job is also to manage risk in the scope and role of work that you actually do. What's important here is obviously, I think, or I know, tone from the top is important, which is why I'm glad to see some of the, friends and clients that I know of who sits on the boards, right? Because they give you the good guidance that you require in your organization. This question is interesting. We ask the question, who do you think is primary, so the question is primary responsible for risk management? Everyone said the board. Right? The other big portion says the guy who sits in the biggest office. This was the statistics I tell you in the private sector 5, 6 years ago, mirrors almost the same results as you're seeing here. The audit committee gets quite a fair bit as well. The poor internal auditors, and maybe the person most responsible in the whole thing, the board risk committee, gets the least flagged. So you might want to sit in that committee instead. Because that's the least that's expected of you, notwithstanding that's your scope of work that says that your job is to manage risk. But in reality, there's not many IPCs or charity that even has a board risk committee. Right? So who do we think should be responsible for risk? Anyone can shout an answer to me. Everybody, absolutely. It should be everybody. So this was like a trick question because you're allowed to tick more than one. Right? But I think everyone ticked one. Right? So to be fair, how you read the question is how the respondents, but I think from my own pulse, from my own reckoning, I don't think we're too far off that most people think the board are the ones that's primarily responsible for it. You're not wrong, technically speaking, but to my earlier illustration, all of us here, in terms of what we do in our organization, including myself, working for KPMG, I carry risk on behalf of the organization. Right? So that's the primary thing. So this is it. Risk management is everyone's responsibility. Right? So if you go back to your organization, you should ask that to the question. The first awareness that we need to build is to let everyone know that all of us that works in our organization has a primary responsibility. And that responsibility is carved out in your job description. Because if you take that theory or you take that sense or the understanding that if everyone did their job that they're meant to do properly, you add them all out together, you float them to the top, you aggregate to the top, nothing should go wrong. Is that correct? But if someone down the supply chain or the value chain breaks somewhere in between, that's when something will go wrong. And it's unfortunate because if you look at all organizations, we draw them in boxes. Right? So when you ask individuals, they think that, oh, my responsibility is in the box that I'm drawn to fit in. And that's my responsibility. Which is why I mentioned, technically speaking, if everyone did their work in the box that they're being drawn on, if you add it all the way to the top, which is the CEO and the board, we should be okay. But the reality is that because we're all drawn in boxes, we all work in silos. So the other big risk is actually a silo risk, which means that if something's gone wrong in a particular box and not communicated to another box in the organization, is where we typically face huge issues when there's a break in between the supply chain or the transactional activities that we are faced on the day-to-day basis. Another question we ask all of you is that what do you think are the risks that you're being faced with which are more important in terms of the lowest to the highest? I'm not sure that maybe all of you have been reading the newspaper too much, so you cited IT as the most important risk. I'm not saying that IT should not be. I think everything that you see here are important risks to you. But of course, you can't deal with everything with the same level of intensity, so you need to rank them, right? I was just speaking to Prof. Ho, and he's saying that IT is probably something that even large organizations do not have a good handle on. So I'm glad that a lot of you have picked this up, because the last thing you want to know, or the last thing you want to happen, is that your database is being hacked into, your donors' information like IC, home address, telephone number, credit card number is being stolen, it creates what you call a reputational risk, as Chairman mentioned. Right? And this is where maybe you take a step back and ask yourself, obviously financial risk is big because we don't have money, we can't continue to operate, we have a going concern issue. Strategic risk is something that's quite hard for most of us to understand because that typically happens at the board, at the C-suite level. And operational risk, I think, it's actually quite critical and important because these are the small things that happens that creates a huge impact. Okay? And then compliance risk, compliance to what? The IPC rules, these, the HR rules like MOM in terms of human resource, and then lastly, information technology. Okay? So here, where it says here, let me clarify, the one that's least important is information risk management. So everyone is saying that we need money first. But we fail to recognize that if the last bit happens, we may not even have money to come through the bank account because people lose confidence in your organization, and that's how organizations fall apart. Okay? But this gives us a good sense of what the sector is thinking, and I don't think we are too far off because a lot of you, in large part, depends on donations and donors. So which is why you said that we need money to make sure that we are a going concern. So this is the toolkit that I think all of you have picked up that I mentioned before. So what it is, like I said, it's meant to help you to serve as a resource guidebook. And don't go and tick the boxes as Chairman mentioned, because the idea is not to tick all the boxes. That's the biggest mistake, and that's something I do not want you to leave this room thinking that you have to look at this page by page and do all of the pages. Okay, so this is not a school homework where you go back and fill up all the pages and the principal signs off. But this is for you to go back to what I call a self-help starter kit. Right? We wanted to also put in a framework in place, and the framework I will share with you in the next few slides is as easy as 4 steps. It gives you a sense of what that methodology is, some templates and some examples. So as I mentioned, as a resource guidebook, it provides you a framework. A framework means that it tells you what you need to do and what are those simple steps. So let me share with you what those steps are. And I kid you not, it's as simple as these 4 steps. Right? What you need to do first is how you identify and how you prioritize a risk. The second step, after you prioritize and ask yourself what those risks are, you just need to ask yourself, what causes this risk to happen? And I'll show you and walk you through a few examples. How do you manage them? And lastly, how do you monitor and report them? So this is as simple as this. If you guys want to do this, you go back to your organization, sit amongst your management, 4, 5, 6, 10 people, and just ask yourself, what do you think are the risks that we face in the organization? The previous list that we looked at in terms of financial risk, strategic risk, operational risk, that's exactly what you need to ask yourself. Right? So between 10 of you, I'm sure you can come up with 10, 15, 20 risks. So the idea after you come up with the 10, 15, 20 risks, you need to basically take this to the board and ask your board to say that, look, this is management views of what the risks are. And in reality, I think what you will find that their priorities at the board level is slightly different to yours. Slightly different. You will have, in some parts, a lot more operational risk that you're concerned with. By the board level, they are saying that don't get me into trouble. What are those risks that will get me as a board into trouble? So the nuances, depending on the optics or who's looking at this, will be slightly different. It's not wrong, it's a different point of view. Which is why this exercise is important for you to brainstorm. Because if you ask 10 people in your organization, I guarantee you'll have 10 different answers of what those 10 individuals think their risks are or what's important for the organization. Right? Now, once you manage to have a consensus amongst the 10, 15 people that you sit with at the management level, you ask yourself, what do you think are the most important ones for the organization? To my earlier point, because if you look at this from an individual perspective, if you're the finance manager, what would your biggest risk be? Finance. If you're the IT manager, what do you think your biggest risk would be? You would say IT. Right? But take yourself as an organization to maybe say that you're not an IPC, you don't have much donors. The IT guy might say I'm very important, but obviously at the top end of the organization, you may say that, well, even though if you got hacked, what's the worst that could happen to us? We don't have any donors' information that could be stolen. So your risk is minimal in that respect. And that's basically what you would do. You would come up with perhaps a list with the categories on the left. In the second column, you have what we call the name of the risk. So in this example, financial risk, you would have funding risk as one of your risk items that I'm sure all of you will pick up if you're an IPC because you collect donations. The risk description on your right-hand side is where you would describe the risk. Because remember I said, when 10 of you sit down together, you ask yourself, what is a professional liability risk or non-compliance with established laws and regulations? You may have a different understanding with respect to what each of you think the risk may look like. So the definition is important because it helps frame the actual risk description itself. So what we're doing here, we're trying to put everyone into the same page. We want people to understand that as we mention each of these risks, within the 10 or 15 of us and within the board structure itself, we actually truly understand what these risks are. When I say this, where we do work, we would have the risk category. We've identified all the risks. 1 year later, when we came back, we sort of mentioned the risk. Everyone looks at each other and say, sorry, what was this risk again? Right? Which brings up to the point that the risk description is important. And each of you may have described this or will probably describe this slightly differently from one organization to another. It's not difficult, is it? And this is the point. You may end up with maybe 15, 20, or 50 of these. The question you ask within the 10 people or 15 people, what do you think are the most important one? Right? So what we're trying to do, we're trying to prioritize because we don't have enough resources. So remember, one of the key findings that we found out is that you've told us that you don't have enough resources. And even though when you do, you mentioned, or some of you here have stated that we don't have the right capabilities to undertake to implement risk management function. Like I said, it's very simple. There's only 4 steps in this whole exercise. And how do you prioritize a risk? So we put into the template itself a simple what you call 5x5 grid. What this 5x5 grid is that it's got likelihood and it's got impact. And this is where within your organization itself, you would identify what severe, major, moderate, and minor is. And again, each of you would have a different understanding as to what the definitions of some of these are. Why this is important? Because it puts perspective in terms of trying to gain consistency in the whole process itself. Right? Because the 10 people that I mentioned, when you ask them to rate this, you have 10 different movements in this particular chart itself. So what we're hoping to achieve here, once you've identified and prioritized your risk, is to say that if any of these fell into the red zone, these are the ones that we need to focus on. You may continue with the 20 or 50 that you've identified, and you find that some of them are very low-risk areas. So all this chart and all this grid attempts to do is to consistently plot it onto a matrix so that we all have an understanding at the organizational level, hopefully at the board level, that we recognize formally this is where our risk sits. When you have a picture of this, this is what you call a risk universe. So for each organization, if you do this, you will have what you call a risk universe for your organization. What this helps you do, it helps you to try to divide the box into 4. We want to be focusing on the ones on the top right-hand corner. It need not be very difficult at all, right? Because if I ask 10 of you in your organization, I ask you what your top 10 risks are, number one, I think I'll get the wrong I will get answers which are different. Even though if I did get the right answers, I will ask you, can you rate in order 1 to 10, the most important to the least important top 10 risks? You will also get a different answer. Which is why what this exercise attempts to do is to get all of you on the same page. Once you've done that, you ask yourself, I've got my top 10 risks now. You ask yourself, what do I have in place? Which means what controls do I have in place to mitigate this risk? Okay? So this is where you may have a risk that's called fraud risk. So let me use that as a simple example because we all understand that. This is where you go through within the group and ask yourself, if fraud is one of the top 10 risks we identified, let's brainstorm to ask ourselves, what causes this risk to happen? And some of the answers may be, we don't have a policy in place. We don't have an internal audit to check us. We have a lack of resources which results in lack of segregation of duties. giving rise to potential conflict of interest in the job scope and responsibilities. So you're trying to cite and understand all the reasons as to what may potentially cause fraud to happen. That's when you then ask yourself to say that, do we need to put in additional controls in place? And again, these are not rocket science, because this is a matter of just sitting amongst yourself to ask yourself the question, what do I need to do to tighten the controls or to reduce the likelihood, right? So you find that in most of the controls that you put in place, it reduces the likelihood of the risk, but not necessarily the impact. So in the fraud example, assuming that it's up here in terms of we're saying that it's likely it's going to happen because of all these factors we cited, you would then ask yourself, well, maybe we can do some controls that we can put in place to reduce the likelihood. The point is that you may be able to reduce the likelihood, but you may not be able to reduce the impact. This is where Chairman talked about the reputation risk. The reputation risk will remain to be high if the event happens. I wanted to clarify something because I see a lot of organizations, and the one thing they'll ask me, say, look, Irving, why don't we have reputation risk in place? And I say reputation is a consequence of an event happening. Reputation itself is not really a risk. It's a consequence of something else that happened that causes reputation to be adversely affecting your organization. So take a step back. If you put reputation risk as one of the risks, the question you need to find out is that what causes reputation risk to be adversely impacting your organization. You may have 101 things that you're listing out, which should be impractical for you to try and control the 101 things that you cited. So I'd rather look at it the other way around. Ask yourself, what causes an adverse reputation? And that's the event that you're trying to control and not the 101 things that causes an adverse reputation. Does that make sense? Once you've identified the top 10 risks, take it to the board. This is when you ask yourself, do I have enough resources? And this is where it's important, because one of the findings through the survey is that there's a lack of accountability. The accountability is important because of the top 10 risks, you want to make sure that each and every one of the risks is being looked after by an individual person. Take the scenario, if something happens, if you don't have an individual person that is being assigned that risk, when something happens, we all look around and say, it's not my fault. Right? So one of the most important benefits of risk management is having the ability to identify a particular specific risk and a particular person to look after that risk. Some of the risks may be very clear-cut. If it's financial risk, you will say, oh, the finance manager. If it's an HR risk, you can say, it's a HR manager. But some other risks, like in the operation parts of the organization, may be a bit more difficult to identify the one single person. But that's the challenge. The challenge is to pick that one person, because what you want that one person in your job description to say that you're responsible for this particular risk itself. So when something goes wrong, that particular individual is cognizant of the fact that he or she has been mandated to look after that risk. So to my earlier point, because if you look at the organization where, for example, we receive donations, you get the people that markets the donation, you get the people that takes in the donation, someone else that banks in the money. So the transaction flows from one box to the other box. And that's a challenge to pick that one person, because when it crosses to the next box in your organizational chart, the person who passes that transaction says, it's got nothing to do with me anymore. And that's where things falls in between the cracks. This is what we call the lines of defense. KPMG uses what we call the 4 lines of defense. So let me briefly describe to you why this is important. In the first line of defense, in most organizations, they have what you call your policies and procedures. So all of you will have your own policies and procedures which governs your day-to-day operations, called your first line of defense. Your second line of defense is where the ERM framework falls into place. The second line of defense enhances the first line of defense. So what is the second line of defense? It makes it stronger. So some of the bigger sectors will have a fraud risk management framework. It's called a second line of defense. It helps to enhance the first line of defense. Your third line of defense are your independent assurance. So if your first 2 lines of defense fail, you hope your internal auditors or your external auditors will pick it up. Now, if the first 3 lines of defense fails, guess who's ultimately responsible? The board, which is why a lot of you said the board is primarily responsible for risk. Right? And in the Singapore context, if you're a company director, that's where the buck stops. Because you could be criminally indicted if you're a director of the company, and if you're negligent, you can actually go to jail for it. right? But obviously in this sector, it's slightly different. But if you think about the concept, that's where essentially you gain the, the fourth line of defense. Now, if you look at this, what's most important in the internal, what we call the 4 lines of control or the internal control framework, it consists of people, process, and systems. So this is where the board typically employs the key people like the CEO, the people who put in the process and the systems. Because the process and the systems itself don't give birth on its own. They need people to construct the process and the systems. But of the people, process, and systems, guess which ones are hardest to manage? What do you guys think? Shout. People. So people is actually the biggest risk in all organizations. It's not the process or the systems, because most of you would have very good processes and systems in the first line of defense. Most of the sectors and most of the organizations that we are asked to review or audit, we will ask, first step, show me all your policies relating to procurement. Show me all your policies relating to payroll and HR. All of you, I can guarantee you, can show me at least a piece of paper, if not a booklet in that particular area. So it's not because the biggest financial scandals in the banks in the world did not have the first line of defense well constructed. It is the people that caused these failures, not the lack of processes, nor the lack of systems. And in your sector where you cited, lack of resources is a key concern for you. My concern for you is the people's risk. That's probably the biggest risk in your sector, in your organization. Now, we would like to think, not that people are dishonest, because that's where the HR process becomes very important, because who the HR process or the HR manager that employs the first interview, it's important that they actually are able, right, to decipher, at least to some extent, the integrity of the individual. Because the first assumption that I made is that everyone in the organization has got integrity. And that's why the control, when we employ people, becomes extremely important. And that's where we try to find out, are they the right fit for us? Do they understand what we do? Do they believe in what we do? If they do, hopefully, they're there to do the right things. So in your risk register or your risk universe, if you don't have people's risk as a key risk, I would be concerned for you. Right? I'm sure all of you agree, right? That will be your biggest risk. Okay? So who's responsible? What is important becomes your reporting. So obviously, like, you're not going to sit around the table and discuss 20 risks that you want to address because there's no capacity for you to do so. You ask yourself, what's the most important thing that we need to be concerned with? Who are the risk owners that we've assigned this risk to? And that's what you would report, right? And the acid test, as I mentioned to you, if you sit around the table 1 year later, if you look at your risk universe, they look the same. That's when you should be concerned that things may not be going in the right manner. So in reality, if you look at this, it's as simple as the 4 steps, right? What's important in the process, I think, would be a change of mindset. So I want each of you to walk out of here not thinking this is difficult. It is really as simple as the 4 steps that I've mentioned in the toolkit itself. Then within your organization, if you build awareness, I think at least for a starter, you're able to jumpstart this process. Now my last slide, which I've been told to show you, is the VCF funding. Not because you can employ KPMG, but because I think after I told this, we got no more business because you do this on your own, which is a DIY. And I really encourage you to do so because I really think that you don't need us, a lot of you. I think that you can start this journey on your own with the simple 4 steps. And we do this because we're passionate in this area, not because we want to make money out of this area, I was telling some of you. Because if we did, we wouldn't be giving you the toolkit because that's giving you my IP away. Right? But I truly want all of you to be successful in your sector because you're all doing the right things. And more importantly, if you find this difficult, before coming to this, I hope you have a sense of relief, and I hope you have a sense of confidence walking out of here that you can actually at least start the process by getting your colleagues together and sitting around and asking yourself, what are the most important risks we think our organization faces? The second step would be, what do we have in place that manages these 10 risks? The third thing is that, can we put in a person, or can we name a person to be responsible for these 10 risks? And that's basically all you need to do. Then take it to your board. Make sure you engage your board, which I think is important. Because as I mentioned, we need to build awareness. In the previous slide, the awareness is not just at your level, but it is also at the board level. Okay? With that, thank you very much.
Mr. Irvin Low, partner with KPMG in Singapore. Currently the head of risk consulting practice, Mr. Low has undertaken numerous corporate governance reviews for both public and private sectors. Next up, we have Ms. Joy Tan, partner of Wong Partnership. Ms. Tan sits on the board of charities such as Singapore Repertory Theatre, and she has also served as a judge for the Charity Council's annual Charity Governance Awards. We would also like to invite Dr. Ang Hak Sing, Commissioner of Charities, to join us on the panel. Dr. Ang was appointed as Commissioner of Charities in 2017 January and has been actively engaged in the people's sector through his past leadership roles in People's Association, Health Promotion Board, and the Singapore Police Force. Moving on, we also have Ms. Angeline Wee, Chief Executive Officer of HCA Hospice Care. Ms. Wee joined HCA Hospice Care in December 2015, and prior to that, she has held several regional and senior IT management roles in MMCs. Last but not least, this session will be moderated by Professor Ho Yu Ki, who is Principal Investigator for the research conducted. Formerly from NUS Business School, he is currently the Associate Provost of Singapore Institute of Technology.
Good morning to all of you. Thank you for taking the time out to come for this session. We have heard from Irvin Low concerning the risk management. In this hour of panel discussion, what we would really love to do is to be able to get the panel to dialogue with the audience. Right. So what I would do is that we'll be asking a few questions for us to poll. Then I'll ask the panelists to give us some comments. And most important of all, we would like to hear from you. Right? What are your concerns? What are the areas that we can do together to move this risk management forward as a charity sector? Charities like commercial entities are exposed to a whole host of risks. I think for myself, who sits as a board member of a charity, our constant concern has always been, in the event of a risk or an event that takes place, that we are not mindful of our control for it, that risk event can actually wipe out all the good works that we have done over the years, in the sense that it can bring us into reputational disasters, or it can actually cripple us for many years to come. Before we commence this formal panel discussion, I would like to pick your brain to help me to describe risk in one or two words using the Pigeonhole software that you have, right? I would like to use this as a launch point for us to get a better understanding concerning what does risk means to you, using one or two words as a description. I'm going to give you a short time to key in what comes to your mind in the first instance. Okay. So reputation is the main concern that all of you have concerning risk. All right. So what we'll do is that we'll probably try to understand a bit more. What do we mean by reputation? All right. I'd like to suggest that risk can be defined as a potential of losing something valuable. I guess for most of you who are board members will realize that when a charity has a risk event, for that matter, it not only affects the reputation of the charity, it also affects your personal reputation. All right? So in that sense, that the good works that has been done could actually be neutralized for that matter. But I would like to suggest too, that risk events or risks can also be opportunities for us to further improve the organization, to make it what is so-called future-proof or risk-proof for that matter. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to ask the panelists, what are some of the key risks that your organizations or those boards that you're on that you face, all right? To share with us as specific as possible. Maybe I ask Ms. Angeline Wee, right, who is the CEO of HCA Home Care.
Okay, so when we embarked on our ERM process, we had many risks in our list for risk universe. And, but after discussions, further negotiations, we finally landed up with about 5 tier 1 risks. Of course, there are risks that include fraud, which was very important to us. Workplace health and safety was important to us as well. Medical service incidents is also very important to us. You know, even though you say we are a hospice, we still need to make our patients as comfortable, as pain-free as possible. So medical service incidents are also very important to us. Data confidentiality as well, not just of the patients, but of the donors and the information. So these were some of the tier 1 risks that we listed in our ERM framework.
How about Joy, Ms. Joy Tan? All right.
Yeah, hi. So I sit on a variety of things. I guess the thing that I've been asked to come here to speak about is the Singapore Repertory Theatre. So I'm the vice chair of the SRT, which is an IPC status organization. I want to say one of the best theatre companies in Singapore. And we're enhanced level, right? Which is sort of above 50 and below 10 million in terms of gross annual receipts. I think that, when I first joined the board, and, which was around, I think, the time that the first code was being promulgated. So we, pursuant to sort of the legal advice and so on, we said, oh, we'll set up all these board committees. At that time, the committee that we set up was actually Audit and Finance, as sort of a joint committee, right? And we also had Nomination and Remuneration Committee, again, a joint committee, which I was going to say, unfortunately, chair. So that's happy things such as term limits, which obviously is a very controversial matter, as well as executive remuneration, right? So now with the new code, obviously, and I suppose as we've come along in this journey with the SRT, I mean, arts charities, I think, traditionally not necessarily the most well-resourced and so on. I think the SRT has placed, I think, quite a lot of emphasis in terms of governance. So with the advent of the new code and the new level of sophistication, I think that we've sort of learned along the years, we decided to split the audit as well as the finance board committees, which is pursuant to the recommendations and actually previous to the new code, but we've just done that. And also we've taken a leaf out of the book of the new code under the new principle 6, which really is to set up a risk committee. So we've split audit and finance, so it's now audit and risk, and then finance and investment. And I want to say I'm privileged to sit on the board with very well-qualified people, and this also, I think, is one of the critical aspects about things like board composition in terms of diversity and experience and expertise. Irving's former partner at KPMG, Richard Tan, from the NUS Business School, sits on our board as well, and he was instrumental, I think, in the push to set up a risk committee in the SRT. So Richard is there, and he sort of heads up the risk committee at the SRT. So you can ask him the difficult questions as to the things that we've looked at. I mean, obviously, as an arts charity, I mean, the concerns that we have in terms of risk are the concerns faced by many of you, right? So I mean, I think concerns in terms of donors, in terms of financial risk, obviously also in terms of employee risk, which we've had to, I think, grapple with. Now, as I think Irving is saying, risk management is a journey. So, and we're at the start of this journey because we've just set up our audit and risk committee. And I suppose it's fair to say that we're in the orange section of the KPMG report, in that we do have risk procedures, but we're in the process of documenting them. So hopefully, by the time we have this conversation again, the SRT will be in the purple sector. And not just that, we won't just be paying, I suppose, lip service to drafting the procedures. We will actually be implementing them meaningfully with Richard's guidance. I'm sure that will be the case.
Sure. I think one of the aspects in the sense of having good people on the board becomes very important. In the sense of bringing the necessary expertise to upskill the charity. What I'm going to ask Dr. Ang as a Commissioner of Charity, and also Irvin, will be this thought pattern. Now that we know that risk surface to the top, as some of the concerns of charities. How can charities, in the light of facing such risks, turn them into opportunities for the charity to do much better? All right.
Morning, my brothers and sisters. You know, the earlier question asked why risk management is important and what are the risks that is in the charities that we have been doing. I mean, earlier you heard Chairman's speech. Of all the lengthy speech, all are very good stuff, but there's one thing that sticks very deeply in the mind. And that is, if you are in the childcare business and your job is to educate and develop the child, instead of educating the child, you employ somebody who molested the child. Can you see the paradox? The paradox is you are there to help, instead you are there to destroy. That, I think, is very stuck on why risk management is so important. Because the moment that happens, trust is gone. We are in the business of trust. Trust whereby donor, people who want to give, entrusted us to a purpose to help a particular group of beneficiaries. At the moment the trust is eroded, that's it. I think that is the biggest risk. At the end of the day, all other risks accumulated too. So I hope that statement, that story by Chairman, one little episode only, in so deeply as to why risk management is so critical. As to the questions of what we can do about it and turn it into opportunities, again, I'm very wary about we all become frightened of our own shadow. It means to say what? The best way to avoid this risk is what? Do nothing. Do nothing, nothing will get wrong. Don't do anything. But I'm very sad to say, if you take that as an approach for risk management, then you miss the mission of the purpose why you want to serve in the charity. The purpose of you want to serve in the charity is that you want to make a difference to life. You want to make a difference. Therefore, what is important is, ask yourself what is important to the charity. Because what is the purpose? And then the flip side of it to ask is, what will make you not achieve the purpose? Then you are focusing on what matters, not focusing on your own shadows. Because it's the same side of the coin, you know, opportunity and risk are the same side of the coin. But the same side of the coin must be focusing on what matters. A good example of what matters is if you are in the business of charity, they're helping children in providing them, say for example, things that we take for granted. Then what matters is what? The well-being of the children, not the well-being of the adult. And not even technology, I must say, as your first important opportunity or risk management that you should focus. But if you are in the business, if you are in the charity or looking after the elderly, helping the elderly to recover faster, because some of our elderly now with aging population in Singapore, then what will it be? Is how to give, how to help in rehabilitation. So what is your biggest risk? Your always the biggest opportunity. Your biggest opportunity is how to help them so that they can have better quality of life. How can they return back to, so that they can enjoy the things that we take for granted. That is an opportunity, but that is also your biggest risk. Because instead of somebody come to you for help, instead of helping, instead of getting better, he become more sick. instead of having better quality life, he's having worse quality life. That is the risk. So focus on what matters.
I'm challenged to follow the flow of the commissioner to stick to healthcare example maybe. There's a recent case that I reported, and I was speaking to some of our clients in the healthcare sector. So one of the risks identified was the fact that they were not able to fill all the slots for the physiotherapy sessions. But concurrently, they had other risks that had technology as a risk that if they did not adopt technology at a faster pace, they were at the risk of losing out in some areas of operational efficiency. So this is the other point. If you look at all the risks at a holistic level, you're able to map, saying that you have a risk on some of these areas in, for example, I'm not able to meet all the physiotherapy sessions that I'm meant to do to get our patients to recover as quick as possible. They were looking at their risk profile and said, well, we have another risk here that says that technology, we don't adopt it enough. So what they did, as I mentioned, some of you may have seen this in the news, they decided to marry the two together. They took that risk of these two and they merged it into an opportunity. Because what they started to do to say that instead of getting patients to come to the hospital, we do it over the web, right? So they were able to flip that across, and then they managed to serve and conduct more physiotherapy sessions online rather than have the patients physically come to the hospital. Because by getting them to do that, it creates a traffic at the end of the hospital. It creates additional resources for the nurses to come to the base to pick up the patients because they can't really walk in the first place anyway. So by doing what they did, which is to get them online to do their sessions, you save not just manpower, but you save choking points throughout the hospital process itself. So I thought that was one good example of not looking at things in isolation, to my point earlier, but looking at it on an aggregated basis. And in reality, where we do our work today, we find that a lot more of our clients are turning all these risks into opportunities, which benefits them in a much, much greater sense than they ever imagined.
In fact, if you look at the IPC sector, the charity sector, this is what Singapore has constantly been doing. For example, we were at one point in time very concerned about the financial part of charities. So one of the things that we have done was to get all the charities to put their financial statements onto the internet, so that transparency helps us to overcome the challenges of charities misbehaving financially. So I think I like what Commissioner says, that risks and opportunities are two sides to the same coin. Using the same example, you're running a childcare center. You will give a lot of peace to your parents if the parents know that you have a very clear policy concerning hiring individuals with criminal records or with background check as it is. So you have a risk mitigation policy. The risk mitigation policy can be used as especially when it's working and you're applying it, can be used as a point to advertise or at least to strengthen or provide confidence and assurance to your stakeholders. So that's why I like the thought pattern here. As all of us poll, integrity becomes one of the hallmark of the charity. And risk is meant to uplift that particular integrity notion that we have. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to enter into to poll you all for 2 questions, right? With the answers that we have. Thereafter, I'm going to pause for a while and open it to the ground for questions and answer. And then we're going to come back to look at the risk governance and management. It's all right, because I really like to hear from all of you. What are your thoughts and what are your concerns? So let us have the first question, right? Let's have the first question that asks, how familiar are you with the topic of risk management? The results is the highest being 42.5%, and they're still coming in, or 40.5 or 40, all right. But it seems like the clear winner at this point in time is that they're somewhat familiar, but my organization does not have a risk management process. All right? So I got a strange feeling. I think this is probably where we are sitting in terms of risk management for the charity sector. When I was analyzing the survey results, one of the words that I used basically was the fact that we are in a denial mode. Right? I think to a certain extent, all of us know that risk management is important, or risk is something that we need to deal with, like oxygen. But we are not able to quantify it. We are not able to get a handle on it. Right? So that's why if you look at the survey result, if you look at the detailed survey result later on when you go back, you realize some of the results that are documented are not consistent. 50% of the organization says that they have a risk management framework or processes, but only 20% allocate budgets. So I scratch my head and say, are there risk management where you don't have to spend a single cent? So immediately the results tells us that there are discrepancy in terms of our thought pattern. And I suspect that answer to this question actually gives us some sense that we think and believe that risk management is there, but we really don't have a process. And I think this is a good revelation for that thought pattern. Let's try the second question as it is. Let's try the second question. What do you consider as key success factors in implementing and sustaining a successful ERM program? And I think, Erwin, you will like the response because the majority of them say the strong risk awareness and understanding within organization. And I think if we can bring this message across and as the final destination for us today, I think this session will have meant a lot and would have been very, very useful. All right, so with this, I want to open it to the ground. Raise your hand. I think there are microphones around here. And please tell us your name and the organization that you come from, and we will write it down so that at least we take note of the feedback from the respective organization. Is that right? Okay. Yes, sir.
Yes. My name is Bhagesh. I'm representing the Nature Society of Singapore. Now, the organization I belong to, most of our work is volunteer-based, so we literally don't have staff, right? And a couple of staff, and that's pretty much it. So if we are arranging nature walks, it's volunteers, you know, and so on and so forth. So how do you sort of then apply a risk management framework or understanding and then everything else with volunteers? Because today it's this volunteer, tomorrow it could be someone else. Thank you.
Okay. So on that particular point where you have a lot of volunteers, I think frankly sometimes volunteers do pose the greatest risk to you because of unfamiliarity with respect to what they are encountering in terms of their work or job scope. So this is where it's important perhaps to give them a guidebook and maybe 1 or 2 pages to say, look, these are the 3 things you need to watch out for in the work that you're doing today. If you encounter this, maybe this is a number to call if you get into an accident. And very simple things, I think. And to my earlier point, this need not need to be difficult. Keep it as simple as it needs to be. And in the case of volunteers, I think literally tell them if there are 3 things you need to know, these are the 3 things. Right? So in your example where they're volunteering to give nature walks, you mentioned, right? So take for example, if an accident happened, do they even know what to do today? Because you're asking yourself or helping them to understand that in the course of your volunteer work, these are the 3 to 5 things that you may encounter. And the ASIC test really, like I said, it's really the conversation that you're having to raise the awareness with the volunteer. You're doing this today, do you know what could possibly go wrong? Right? And I'll leave it as that, as my point is as simple as that.
Yeah. What is the nature of your course? Very important question because it goes back to what is the purpose. And if your purpose is nature walk so that we all appreciate nature, so that these things can then be passed down to our future generations, then what is going to damage your cause? But one thing, and yours is a lot of volunteer, and one thing that really going to damage all your cause is this, is that your volunteer is supposed to be the walking the talk. Instead of appreciating nature and bring people to appreciate nature, he go there, he see nature, he see flower, he pluck, he see fish, he catch. There you are telling nature, nature, nature. There you are destroying nature and destroying. It's your biggest risk. But that is also your biggest opportunity. So that comes back to my earlier talk, my earlier hypothesis, and that is you need to be very clear. The risk and opportunity of whatever organization you are come from what is the purpose. So I'd like to put back to you. When you ask a question, how we do risk management, I'd like to go back to your purpose. In fact, I learned this also from Chairman, to ask a question, what value to your organization trying to carry. If the value is to protect and to appreciate, that is the one that you need to be on the lookout for. Thank you.
Yeah.
I understand the value and all of that part. My question was very specific. How do you get volunteers to understand?
Yeah,
The population changes.
yeah, yeah.
Let me make sure the questions are over here. The question asked is that we understand the proposition, but the important linkage is how do we get the volunteers to understand that this is a risk, and how do they make sure that the risks are being contained as it is? Please go ahead.
Sorry, and that's the reason why volunteer management is not about who want to help, put up the hand. And you then get all these group of people who want to help. First and foremost, if you know that the purpose, back to the purpose is to, your organization is to appreciate nature. Then the people that you want to recruit as a volunteer must share the same vision. Because if they don't share the same vision or share the same value, all other things doesn't fall in place. You can educate until the cow come down. If the person's heart is not with you, the center of gravity will shift. So that is the first risk management. The second risk management is, again, we all like to say, is that just like a lamp, the fire one day will burn out. You must continue to top the oil. Don't ever take volunteer for granted that their passion is always like that. Today they may be north, but if you do not add the fuel, slowly it may turn the south. What does this mean? It means to say that volunteer management in terms of value inculcation, involving them in the strengthening of the value is equally important. Otherwise, the compass can shift. That's where you take a lot of educations, a lot of involvement with the volunteers. So, for many of us who are involved in volunteer management, the biggest worry for volunteer management is people turn into a skeptic. I joined the organization because I believe in it. But instead of become volunteer to take people for nature walk, every time I come, I only involved in carrying table and chair. I can tell you, when they leave the organization after a few tours with you, not only they say they don't like you, they will badmouth you for a long, long time. Our chairman say, once you go into internet, it's forever. No, I want to put it across back to you again. Remember. Remember. Yeah.
Joy,
Yep.
please.
I was not necessarily going to follow the words of advice given by Chairman, by our Commissioner, or by Irving, who I think gave very strong practical hints and guidance as to how any society can manage its risk management in terms of its volunteers. But I did want to commend the Nature Society for coming forward today. They are a basic level charity. They were actually our inaugural winner of the Charity Governance Awards 2016, on which judging panel I was privileged to sit. And I was going to say, as the judging panel, we were very impressed with the Nature Society's commitment to governance as well as now to the issue of risk management. And I think that really one of the very heartening things is to see small charities are small in size, and which may not be necessarily the best resourced, as the gentleman said, very sort of focused on volunteers in order to help in terms of resource. But because it doesn't mean that if you are such a small charity that doesn't have the resources, if you're $10 million advanced level charities, that doesn't mean that you can't be good at governance and certainly at risk management, and I think that one of the exciting things that we were seeing in terms of the awards and in terms of the Nature Society was, I think, the willingness and the keenness to sort of share those learnings, across with the industry. So I'm glad that you're here, and that there is this commitment, I think, demonstrated to enhance the procedures, and in terms of the risk management journey, we hope that you've taken away some important points today, and that importantly that you'll continue to share and to be an ambassador for governance in the sector.
I have a comment, rather an appeal to make to everybody here. I think the example given, well, childcare for risk management and the choice of people to, take care of children so that the right person is employed is a good one, because if not, then you have reputational risks. But I just hope that you all don't get the impression that, we should discriminate against all ex-inmates.
Sure.
In fact, the charity sector is a sector that can best rehabilitate the ex-inmates.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a very thoughtful reminder as it is. Are there any other questions?
Yes, so
please.
I just add on what Sun Hot and their team have done. And you all have heard about the Yellow Ribbon projects. The Yellow Ribbon projects is actually a project that we give our convict a second chance. And many of them actually have done very well after the second chance. So I think his point is, give people a second chance is important. I think now that's not, yes.
Okay, Secretary, can you put back the response for poll question number 2 on the board, please? Because right now what we're going to do, we're going to enter the second part. If you look at the answers, other than the strong awareness of risk, the other 2 most popular response, number 1 is that of the support and direction from the board and senior management. And the next one in line, 90.9%, is clearly define risk roles and responsibilities. I think this is where I'm going to ask the panelists, all right? How can we set and instill the culture for risk management? If the tone starts from the top, so what does that mean, is it? All right? So I will ask Alvin to wrap us up because he probably has all the answers, all right? I'll ask the rest if you could comment on it, right? What does it mean from the tone starting from the top? How do we instill a culture of risk management?
Okay, so for us at HCA Hospice Care, the board was the first level of group of people who said risk management is very important. And we started this process, I think, early 2016. And in between, we appointed our Audit and Risk Committee. We decided on when we should start on our ERM project. And it took us from end to end, from the day we appointed KPMG to do our ERM to the day we finished. It took us 10 months. You may think it's long, you may think it's short. Initially, when we started on that process, we were very concerned that we don't have the resources. But the board helped a lot. And with the appointment of the ARC, or Audit and Risk Committee, that helped as well. So when we appointed, we even had to go through a tender process because it costs a lot of money. We had a tender process, we had 3 vendors, and then we awarded to 1. We were concerned that we didn't have the right resources to do this project. So we all went in feeling very worried, don't know how much time it would take, whether we could continue to do our normal operations work or not. But I think having gone through the process, I must say that it really wasn't that difficult on hindsight. When the board sets the tone, when the senior management decides that yes, we will embark on it, we sit down at the kickoff process together with all our staff and told the people, the advantages and the reasons why we're going into it. And I think if the team, your staff, gets bought in and they believe that you are on the right track, then everybody will be very supportive. So it has helped that we have a third party like KPMG helping us because they see things from a different light. We are in it day in, day out doing the same operations. So some of the things that they bring up, we realize, oh, yeah, we never thought of that. So it has helped. And on our side, I think it was important that we appointed 1 project manager to help us. So the project manager is the one who goes around chasing all of us. Have you done it? Have you done that? So that has helped as well. And with KPMG running some of the meetings, so we had focus groups, people just needed to spend that allocated time or the allotted time that we asked them for. We told them upfront this is the amount of time it's going to be involved. It does affect somewhat in terms of operation. So my nurses could not go and see the patients for that 2 hours, for example. But having gone through that and then with the final documentation all done up, I think we felt it was a worthwhile exercise, because now when we all step into the homes of our patients or when we issue medications from pharmacies, we realize that, okay, we are quite well covered. We have protocols, we have processes that has helped us come a long way, and we are more confident when we do our work. So I think the board and the senior management support is very important, but the work really falls on the team. Not that much work, but it's really just a normal process that you do every day, and if you do it well, you would have followed your ERM framework.
Okay, I suppose speaking from the other end of the spectrum, the SRT, you know, although we're an enhanced level charity, we have like less than 20 people on payroll, right? So, I mean, of course, it is you know, needful to reach out to professionals and to third-party consultants. You know, obviously, if you can, and that would certainly be the gold standard. But you know, many of us sort of don't have that resource, or they don't have that, I suppose, as a first instance. I think that one of the good things about the organization on whose board I'm privileged to sit, though, is that we do have directors who do have these sort of competencies and a diversity of expertise. And I think that, at least at the first instance, my organization was hoping to reach out to the eminently qualified risk professional that does indeed sit on our board, and that sort of heads up our audit and risk committee. And you know, hopefully under his guidance, we will look at our structures and indeed see whether it is necessary to undergo, you know, the full-blown process that KPMG would help us undertake in a very robust way, and certainly if you know our eminent audit committee and risk committee head did feel it was necessary to reach out to third-party professionals, then that I think is the route that we would go down. I guess having said that, when we did implement our at that time new guidelines, you know, the person that had to draft it from scratch was a lawyer that sat on the committee, as in myself. So, you know, I guess at the first instance, that is probably the way, you know, many charities that are not necessarily the best resourced would go about it. And, you know, I mean, I do think that is a reasonable way to address these issues. I mean, not all charities have, you know, so 5 figures, 6 figures to throw to spend, obviously in a very you know, responsible manner on their risk management. But you know, again, no one size fits all, right? Risk management can be as small and as simple as you know we can make it. It doesn't mean that you need to spend lots of money on it. And I think, as Irving has pointed out, you know, KPMG and he have been, you know, good enough to put together this toolkit so that, you know, we can do it ourselves, right? And, you know, obviously, if you all are agreeable and have so listened to what we've said today, I think that is a process, at least, you know, the base level, the minimum that sort of should be expected today. And obviously that base level and minimum wouldn't apply to the SRT, because we have Richard who will be able to help us with this process.
Okay, so for me, the tone from the top is quite simple. It's basically to walk the talk. Right? It's as simple as that, right? You need to lead by example. So let me give you 2 examples which are related. One is a construction company which we're all well too familiar with. Every day you drive down the road, pass off the construction site, what do you see? You see banners that basically talks about safety. Before the construction workers start their job and their role each day, guess what happens each morning? They do a safety review. They do a safety briefing. Because you know why? Because to them, they have a risk appetite where fatalities is 0. What does 0 mean? 0 means that you would do everything in your capacity and ability with all the right processes that you need to put in place to make sure accidents is to a minimum, fatalities is zero. So basically embedded into the process that you eat and live health and safety every single day. That's one example. My second example is that one of my big clients called Rio Tinto is a mining company. Health and safety also number one. Every time I go for a meeting and I forget, the first thing they will tell me, before we start a meeting, we need to do a safety share. What does a safety share mean? It means someone around the table needs to share what were the personal encounters they came across that they can learn from and others in the table can learn from as well. And that is not for physical meeting, but also for telephone conferences. So every time I get a conference call around the world, being from Asia, my story is always quite consistent. Yesterday I was in Jakarta coming back, the driver was speeding on the road shoulder. Admittedly, I closed my eyes for 10 minutes and said, no, this is a bad example. I need to show my staff that I have to tell the driver, please don't speed. Please drive on the road, not on the road shoulder. Admittedly, our fault because we said we were late for the airport. So the guy felt compelled that he had to drive fast on the other side of the road to get us to the airport. But my point is, I think walking the talk is important. So lastly, all I need to say is that for the board chairmen here and for the CEOs here who are in the orange and purple box, which means that you've not quite started, walking the talk means that you walk out of this room, you get back to your organization, get your people together and start this process. Because that's really what walking the talk is.
Risk management, when you buy financial instruments, you always hear this first: high risk, high return. Right? Okay. And that's where how risk and opportunity are two sides of the same coin. But for us in charity, you need to remember that the charity has one very interesting element that's very unique to ourselves. And that is the stewardship or the trust. Yes, private sector do have a trust, but there is a secondary order. For us, our primary order is trust. Now, but does it mean to say that we because of trust, we then become very called risk averse? Risk averse means what? Anything of risk, 卖走. Okay, I give you one concrete example, which I partner with NCSS. You know, many of the VWOs, which I scan around, many of you are here, you always wanted social workers. Why? Because you want your volunteer to be of very high skill set. Why? Because you are dealing with very difficult problems. Some of the problem could be difficult children, some of the problem could be, elderly that require special care. So you want the highest skill set. Because why? Because that meets your need. Now this is called zero risk management. But it's not practical. How many social workers Singapore have? Bokau, not enough. Right? And if that is the answer, I'm very sad. Because it defeats the very purpose of why we are involved in charity. Because we want to make sure that it's not only the beneficiary, but also the person who gives also grow. We want to expand the opportunity to get many as people involved so that we help each other as a country. So how do we manage the risk? Well, me and my brother, Sim is here, I call him Gigi. He's my Gigi brother. He's a CEO of NCSS, so don't call him Gigi, call him, if at the VW you should know who is, yeah? So what do? We went in the VWOs, we do a job restructuring, a volunteer restructuring. Because when you restructure the volunteers, you realize that yes, you still need the social worker type, but there are many, many other opportunities you don't require a social worker skills. You can have a lower level skills. And guess what? Because of the restructuring of the volunteerism, Now we unlock more than 40,000 volunteer opportunities. Is there risk? Of course there's risk. The question is, how do we manage? We manage the risk by studying the jobs and then do a restructuring. But at the same time, we work on the volunteer to upskill the volunteer, train the volunteer, so that the volunteer is trainable, you know, so that the volunteer can then now do higher order jobs. By doing so, you manage the risk again. And I tell you another way of managing the risk. This is practical example. Is many volunteers, you ask them, you ask the VWO, they say, volunteers, I want to sign on the volunteer for 3 years. And then the volunteer look at you, hey, I volunteer, you know, you think I'm permanent, sign on for 3 years. No, right? You ask me to sign for 6 months, I may consider. 3 years, you got to be kidding. But have you ever looked from the VWO perspective? Hey, every now and then I become the trainer. 3 months after that disappeared, new one come, I train again. So both sides are correct. So how to risk manage that? This is my brother, got a very good way. He say, okay, we go to companies. Companies have what? Many employees. If this employees today is not free, the next employee is free. The company become the one who do what? Even though it's episodic, but they are able to turn it into what? Instead of one man volunteer or one woman volunteer, into a team volunteer. Is this risk management? You bet it is. Because the system may break down. But how do you manage the risk? You manage the risk by what? Doing it at the company level. Or NVPC, 20%, each of your volunteers, each of you want to do 3 months. We put them together as one team. And now they actually now decide among themselves who come on Monday, who come on Wednesday, who cannot around, call who. Is it risk management? You bet it is. So my brothers and sisters, risk management cannot be seen as an ECA. I'm very worried that many of us see risk management as only wanting to please maybe me, because I impose it in the governance or my chairman. It's not. Risk management at the end of the day is actually helping you to be smarter, faster, and better. Seeing from that perspective, I think that's the best way to imbue risk management into the organization. And think of the examples that I have with my GG partner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Of course, I think one of the challenges we face, we are also very cognizant of this. Some of you in the audience may say that, but risk managements are only for large charities. And in fact, the panelists actually doesn't help because we have HCA and Repertory Theatre. They are all the sub $10 million charities as it is. So you say it is for them. So the challenge right now I want to ask the panelists, before I go to your panel questions, will be, if I'm not a sub $1 million charities, where do I start, right? Where do I begin, as it is? For example, if I'm a charity that is a small size, and when I talk to a KPMG partner, I ask him to be a board member, he doesn't even want to talk to me as it is. What do I then do?
Firstly, that is not true. So just for the record, I'll talk to anyone, that's why I'm here. But if I could answer in taking that gentleman's question in terms of, I have just volunteers, I don't even have full-time staff. How do I start risk management? The answer is simple. It starts with the smallest, even one person, because even if you're a one-man show, you'll be asking yourself, what are my risks, right? Where do I get the next dollar? Where do I spend the next dollar? How do I spend the next dollar? That in itself, unconsciously, you may not know it, but that in itself, as Commissioner said, it's actually risk management. So risk, in my view, is unavoidable. In our daily life, even crossing the road, that is taking risk on its own. You are trying to decide whether do I run now or do I wait for the car to go over. Is amber light, do I stop or do I go? That is risk management. You're taking a calculated position, whether you speed across the amber light or you stop. In the volunteers, same thing. All the volunteers that does nature walk, like I said, all you need to ask, and the volunteer may not even know what their risks are. So if you put a situation to them, if one of your members in the basically group fell down and broke his or her leg, what do I do? Who do I call? What if I had a position of, what a situation of dehydration? What do I do? And surely the volunteer, if have got no idea or no clue, that's where you start risk management. So first point is raising awareness and asking yourself, what are the risks are we being faced with? Like I said, even a one-man show, you will have risks as well. The first point is recognition and acknowledgement that there are risks.
Yeah, I guess just following on from that, and it's certainly similarly not true that law firm partners, big four partners, wouldn't entertain the smaller charities. I think that many of us serve on charities not for status, but really because we're passionate about the cause, right? And I will say that certainly in respect of the SRT, I really believe in the project that we have, and I think that for all of us in this room, I have no doubt that is indeed the position. So wearing, I guess, my nominating committee chairman hat, and picking up from the point that we made previously, that risk management is all about sort of tone from the top, or it's very important that there be tone from the top. I think that actually picking your board members and inviting, stewardship of your board members and inviting them to serve on the boards and to share of their expertise. I think that is critical. I know the Nation Society particularly has engaged in very strong board members with a diversity of skill sets and who are also very passionate about its cause. So, I think that they would be able to provide good guidance and a good steer in that regard. And I think similarly for those smaller charities, and I will say again, the SRT, we have less than 20 people on payroll. We're not regarded as particularly well-resourced, etc. We value every dollar that we get. And I think from that perspective, we aren't sort of out there. We are out there, I think, trying to embark on the risk management journey in a responsible way that obviously sort of checks the boxes for us, but at the same time, provides a best stewardship of the funds the stakeholders have imparted in us.
So you will realize actually, in fact, the board members' succession planning by itself is also a risk. In the sense that getting the right people onto the board actually in many ways will help you to manage your risk. And if there's a risk that you are not able to manage, it will have significant multiplier effects for that matter. I realize that in terms of the questions that is being asked, one interesting question that's asked as most voted by everyone is there a master list of all possible risks and risk description that KPMG can provide? It's KPMG, all right?
Wow, you guys are so ruthless that you're stripping me of everything. The truth of the matter is that we're working with the commissioner and the team. We are trying to get a list out on all the possibilities of what are the common risks in the particular sector. So you can imagine the sector is quite wide, right? You have charity, you have healthcare, you have social services, you have sports. So the reality is that we are working with them. And in terms of the appendix in the toolkit, there are some examples, but I realize it's not complete. So we are trying to work with the team to construct something more useful so that all of you here, where you have voted the most, we will try and roll something out where you have the possibility of trying to get a view or a glimpse of what this looks like.
My brother and sisters, I'm very uncomfortable about that question. When you start to ask for the full list, you are going back into what I call do nothing. So I'm really about it. Why? Because if you have the full list and you try to cover the full list, the only way to do it is to do nothing. If today I ask you, how important is the universe? What's your answer? Is it in the Capron system? Is it in the Zenith system? These are all solars all around. Or is it only important as far as we are concerned is the Earth and the solar systems? So this example tell you is risk management is specific to your organization. It's specific to your charity purpose. only when you have a deep understanding of your purpose, and then ask yourself, what will destroy the very purpose that you are pursuing? That is the risk that you're looking for. Now, somebody say this is very obvious, but I think it may not be obvious because there are sophistication to it. Each of the sector has its own. The easy word to answer, which I elaborate to you all, is trust. But how is trust eroded in your business? That is science. It's not only words like integrity, but where is the source of integrity? Sometimes this requires help. And this is where I thought, at the end of the day, the best person to help you is you help yourself. Now, what do I mean? Helping yourself means that we should perhaps form our own groups of people of the same sector, of the same charity types, coming together and then ask this very important question: what will destroy the very purpose that we want to create? And then drill down to the resolution whereby you can understand what are the activities. Because if you look at only purpose and you only stuck at purpose, you got problem. Better is you look at purpose and then you look at what are the people, process, structure that will destroy the purpose, but still not enough. Then you must look at what are the activity over time that may destroy the purpose, but still that's not enough. Drill down to the day-to-day activities. Now, if you have this resolution of the purpose up to the day-to-day activities, then you know how to manage the risk. So, this community of practice is among your sector is very important. The question of what will destroy your purpose is only you and you can answer. If you think KPMG can answer without you, I will be very sad. Because that cannot be the way. So, very important. Huh? So, now is advertisement.
Very good. Commissioner is going to give us goodies.
No. The advertisement, there are 3 advertisements. Everything comes in 3s, I believe. First advertisement is, we are very keen to form community of practice so that not only for the purpose of risk, as I say, if it's only risk, I think we turn risk into the ECA. We don't want that. Basically, as part of the community of practice, looking on how can we be smarter, faster and better, and how not to be smarter, faster and better, and what will destroy the purpose. So, community of practice that based on your charity. So that's the first point. I don't know whether if you all like, we can pass when you walk out later on, we set up a desk, and you can sign up immediately. So that's the first announcement, first advertisement. The second advertisement, this one actually it doesn't come from me, but since the donor make an offer, I'm looking for acceptance. You see, in the community of practice, if you among yourself know what is the purpose and what is the risk, sometimes you need the skill set to draw out so that from the purpose up to the day-to-day activities. Trust me, it's a science. It requires certain discipline to facilitate, to enable you to see in what I call making the invisible visible. The art of risk management is to make the invisible visible. Easy talk, but it requires expertise. And this is where somebody among here say that I volunteer my staff, professional staff, and do it for free. Okay? And I want the person to say it himself so that it's recorded. How many hours the organization is putting through? Okay, so that's the second advertisement. Perhaps you commit first.
So, proof in the pudding. I will talk to anyone. And to Commissioner's point, I volunteered Notice, not me, but my staff. No, that's not true. I will come down where I'm available or in town. And I told Commission, say, look, I'm passionate personally in this particular sector, where we started work a long time ago, which is why we're doing this. And again, we're not getting paid for the toolkit. And if you think about this, it's like giving my IP away. To go one step further, I would say, me and my staff and my team will personally come down to these sessions to facilitate that session for you. So your most poll question in terms of what you want, which is my earlier response, is that we're working on it. That was what I was referring to. And I wanted to just write on Commission's point, because it's not about giving you that list, because it's called a cheat list. Just like in school, when you have a cheat list, guess what? You're not going to study, you're not going to do the hard yard. Because in reality, you cannot cheat the system. You have to do it to earn the experience. But I personally, like I said, I will volunteer, me and my team will go down to these sessions, which I hope to see you guys there, because I'm building this for you and for the larger community. Because at the end of the day, it may not be my generation, maybe my generation after and after, that should and will benefit from your good work that you're putting in. So as you volunteers, most of you are, in this particular sector, we want to do our bit as well. So which is why I mentioned, and I initially said 100 hours, and I hope you'll be 100 hours and not, well, 50 is okay, right? But not 500 hours.
Can you, Evan, can you clarify that the 100 hour is free? Yes. On the tape?
Yeah. But in any case, it's cheaper than the partner's rate, so ours is free.
Okay, you have heard, is free. Most important word I want to hear only. We are on the charity, charity resources. I think the third advertisement that I want to highlight to you is what Chairman has said in his speech, is that there is a fund that you can apply if you intend to implement it at the structural level. Structural level means sometimes you need to have people, process, structure at these 3 levels. And this is a fund that we built to strengthen the charity. So you can actually apply, and this is an area important to us, and you can rest assured that we will try our best, subject to what you want to do. Don't go and ask to implement the entire list and ask for the full list for KPMG and say you want to do the full list. You can rest assured I will kick back to you. Okay? But if you say that you have done your analysis of what is important, and then you need some, what I call seed investment, this is where we'll be very sympathetic with you. We understand that. But you have one responsibility after receiving the grant, and that is you must come to the community of practice to share your experience. No, it's important, because we want to, it's not only about you, about getting you to inspire the rest. Right? So these are my 3 advertisements. End our advertisement. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to add that when you ask about this master list, I think what's important that we all should go through is, initially we figured out there were risks that we were worried about. So we sort of did our homework first to think about what are the risks we want to tackle, what are the risks that are inherent or possibilities of happening. So we did our homework first. Then we got the cheat list from KPMG, and that helped us in figuring out, oh, what else didn't we think about? So that has helped us a lot when we did our whole ERM framework. So do your own homework first, because if you rely on that cheat list, end of the day, you just use what they have, and you may forget about what really is important to you within your organization. Also, I wanted to add that we used VCF as well. So we will be in the community partnership.
Thank you, sister. Thank you. You saw it, I shake the hand. Thank you, sister. Thank you very much.
Hello, 1, 2, okay, sorry, yeah. Right, so you realize that this is a rehearsal. Actually, at the panelist discussion, actually we did discuss, and with this commissioner, that these are the 3 things that we really want to bring to the audience here today. With VCF funding, secondly, also KPMG has basically volunteered the man hours, and together MCCY, Charity Council as it is, We're going to form community of practices, meaning bring together the sector, the healthcare sector, the youth sector, or whichever sector it is, coming together, key people to talk about what are the risks that they face, so that together we learn and accelerate the entire process of risk management. So there's one question here also on the list, which I thought was very interesting, right? I think one of the issue here is always about how do we start. And one of the suggestions was, should we actually ask the audit committee, at least for the time being, to oversee the risk management until such time where the board or the whole organization is ready to take on the full-blown risk management responsibility. What are your thoughts? What are your experience? Is that your experience in merging it with the audit committee as a starting point?
Okay, so there are pros and cons of getting the audit and risk committee involved. If you get them involved too early, they will be after you all the time. So you really have no time to breathe. So what we did was this. We got the ARC to help us when we did the tender process, to help us select an appropriate partner, someone who can really help us along the way. Then we told the ARC, you step aside, let us continue with what we do on a normal, regular basis. With our focus group meetings, we determine what our tier 1 risks were, and then we came up with our framework and so on. Then when we finished that, then we called the ARC back. This is what we have finalized, and we've thought through it a lot. And then that helps because the ARC would then, ask us maybe just a few more questions. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And we would say yes, because we did really go through it. And finally, the ARC is the one who will help us to present to the board to say that the team has done a good job, this is what's happening. So involve them, but involve them at the right times and the right places.
An ARC stands for the Audit and Risk Committee, all right? So I think these are very important suggestions, because I think the other thing is for the board members too, is that I think don't be too excited, because if you're too excited, if you breathe down the neck of management, the management will feel very stifled as it is, because the last thing you want management to do is to tell you the things, and thereafter you fought them on all the things that they tell you. So I think you probably have to do a light touch. And also the other thought pattern concerning audit committee is the fact that having audit committee to take on the responsibility of risk management, you just have to be very careful, because the audit committee primarily traditionally look after the financial matters. So they can be blindsided in that sense that their entire risk management framework has everything to do with money. So again, risk management is probably much more than that, and these are areas that you want to consider. I'm going to ask whether there's any more questions, because of what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a final question to all the panelists. The final question I want to ask the panelists, if you have one wish for the charities gathered here together, what would you wish in relation to risk management? You think about it, and let us see whether there are any more questions from the crowd, as it is. Yes, there's one question over that side, please.
Thank you, very inspiring, the panel discussion. I'm Supriya Sen from Stroke Association of Singapore. One thing that didn't find mention in the discussion of opportunities being risks, the face of opportunity versus risk, was for small charities like ours, quite often the biggest risk is what we don't manage to do, which is like an opportunity risk. For instance, the charity is very small, only one full-time staff and run by a bunch of volunteers. Even on the board, we are volunteers. But the mission, as you mentioned, of the charity is that you have to reach all the stroke survivors and tell them that this charity exists and invite them to our programs. So the public hospitals is the normal partner, as you mentioned. However, if you find that you're not still reaching more than 5 to 10% of all the stroke survivors, that's the biggest risk. So when we're talking of risk management, maybe this classifies under strategic risk. But it's also a two-faced thing that I'm not concerned with the small minutiae so much, because maybe we can worry about. If you're a food and beverage institution, you can say food poisoning. If you're in other, here we are not providing the actual service, but a psychosocial support. So will we not get deflected if we go into a detailed risk management exercise and lose the forest for the trees? That's the one question. Second, I have a slightly different one. When you talk of the communities of practice, would it be a natural progression to have standards for our sector? So for instance, ours can be compared with the Alzheimer's Association, the others and whatever. Now, if it's a food and beverage, they can classify in that kind of thing, whatever it is. So if you have standards and you, instead of listing out all the risks and overwhelming us, if you have saying that the best ones in the sector have found these risks, and in that also, most likely, least likely, you have that heat map showing this is the risks where they found number 5 risks. So then we'll all concentrate on those instead of starting the whole process again.
Excellent question.
Chairman, may I?
Yes, please.
Yeah. My sister. You are dead on regarding to the definition of risk. In your business, which is stroke, helping people to prevent stroke or stroke recovery, the biggest risk is how can actually I save life or prevent a stroke, or when people have a stroke, how can they recover faster? If you define it by that there are, by the way, we are all, my brother and sister, in terms of diabetes, we are the highest in the world. Not only GDP, we are the highest in the world, if you want to know. About 11%. In terms of hypertension, we are also the same. So while we are very good economically, my brother and sister, health-wise, please take care. So what my sister have said is this, is that what will be the missed opportunity if I can not only help 10, but I can help many, many more. That see from the perspective of both risk of not helping many and opportunity of helping many. You see how she reframe it, how she framed the thing, the risk of not helping many. Now, I'm starting a project, or I drive a movement. Again, it's a little bit of advertisement. I'm in charge of Singapore Care. And the Singapore Care is a movement, exactly what you say, is to help to connect the dot. You may be the doctor and you have a specialist in terms of rehabilitation or prevention, but your expertise is not outreach. The question is, how do you know which Singaporean here have the higher risk of, say, stroke because of their what? Lifestyle. Who you think know all this unhealthy lifestyle? Who? It's not you. But there are other partners who know. Example of partner who know, I think, could be the grassroots, because the grassroots stay there. But not only the grassroots, but there are many other VWOs who operate in the society, in the community. This is where the opportunity comes. I.e., why must you do the outreach? You must leverage, and that's where you connect the dots. Now, I give you another further dot. You alone can handle how many? Sister, you say you got one doctor and say 50 volunteers, 20 volunteers. You think you can handle the volume? You can't. You need to find what? More of you, unless I can clone you. Maybe I should go into the business of cloning. Right? But there are many like-minded people like you in the organizations. So what must we do? We must connect the dot with you and the other like-minded organization. And the third thing is that after you have given through your own medical, there are also lifestyle. Hypertension is not only you know them, you know how to outreach them, not only you do medically, but you and I know hypertension or stroke, the biggest cause is lifestyle intervention. So what is a lifestyle intervention? You need to jog. There are many people jogging, a lot of formal, informal jogging club. So you, the volunteer refer them to you. You make an expert because you are a doctor. And then whatever a doctor say, they're more likely to hear. And then you link them to the jogging club. And then ting, ting, ting. And suddenly what? The entire ecosystem is connected. Connecting the dot is the most powerful way of dealing not only on charity, but many other things. My biggest problem with charity, my brother and sister, let me share with you. I'll be very blatant about it. And I'll tell you this story, you get a shock. One day, I visited, like you all are, our heart is all in the right place. I visited a senior citizen home, a rental flat with senior citizens. I asked for volunteers. I asked for donors. I have good donors. One of the donors gave me a tin of biscuit. So I take the biscuit. I went to uncle's, knock the door, uncle opened. I said, "Uncle, biscuit." Then uncle said, "Oh, this biscuit is heavy. Can you help me to put inside the cupboard?" So I went, and when uncle opened the cupboard, I saw inside 10 tin of biscuits. Mine is 11. Now, what does this story tell you? This story tells you, number one, be careful of overserve. The problem is if we don't connect the dot, we tend to go to the obvious. It's called overserve. And guess what? That tin of biscuit could easily go to someone who is underserved. So, yeah. And how do we address the overserved and underserved? We need to connect them. We need to operate as an ecosystem, even for charities. And that's what Singapore Care attempts to do. All right, so please find me. I'm driving this movement as part of my passion. And I think only by doing that, then we as a charity movement, we actually can achieve the outcome of 1 + 1 equals to 100. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Right, I'm going to bring this session to a close. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to ask the panelists, if you have one wish for all of us, what would you wish for us in terms of risk management for the charities that are present here this morning? Anybody want to start first?
For me, it's quite simple. I hope for all of you to take the first step to help yourself. You can see even the Commissioner, ourselves and everyone on this panel wants to help you, but we can't help you if you do not want to help yourself. So my wish that in 2 years' time when we redo this survey again, I hope to see a much improved respondents with respect to the adoption of risk management.
My own wish, Chairman, is just, I guess, following on from what Irving has said. Once you all have taken the decision to help yourselves, my wish is that you take the decision to reach out to each other. In your sectors, I think that Commissioner has talked about this whole notion of the community, of the charities in your particular industries and your particular sectors. You know, I mean, I think one of the things that we look at on the judging panel of the Charity Governance Awards is this whole issue of being able to reach out and to benchmark yourselves against the other members in your community. I think that is very critical. I think the risk management journey, we've all been talking about, you know, the fact that it is a journey. We should all learn from each other. And so my wish is that we do indeed learn from each other, engage with each other, and do try to sort of benchmark yourselves, I guess, against the best practices of each other in terms of risk management.
Thank you.
Okay, my wish is that all of you, all organizations, will see that risk management is very simply just regularly running your business and your charities well. And once you do that, then you realize that it's really not so onerous to embark on it.
My brother and sister, talk is cheap. Action, that is what is important. I promise you, you will not walk the journey alone. If you want it, you intend to do it, I'm prepared to walk the journey with you in whatever I can.
So thank you very much with the very reassuring words from the Commissioner of Charity. You will never walk alone. We are not Liverpool, but we will never walk alone as it is. Right, so I'll bring this panelist discussion to an end, and thank you very much for all your sharings. Shall we give them a hand of appreciation?